Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 37 of Genn and Millie, where a Gen Xer and a millennial share the strength-based perspective through which they view the world. We are your hosts, Allison and Tess. Welcome, everyone.
Welcome.
Happy March 25th. Sean is 19 today.
Oh my gosh.
I have two fully complete adults.
You have a 19. Oh yeah, because 19 is Nebraska's
Legal age of
legal age of
adulthood. I have
crazy.
adult children officially.
Wow.
Yeah, what can you do at 19? Why is it the legal?
I have no idea. I'm trying to think. Vote is like Minnesota. So Minnesota's 18.
Yeah.
And like that's when I got the right to vote.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I can claim independence from like I can file my taxes separately if I would want to. Unless I became emancipated earlier before that.
So 19 is the age of legal adulthood, but yet it doesn't bring any
benefits.
Perks?
Because like driver's license is 16.
Can you buy tobacco at 19?
Oh yeah, that's probably it.
Blech. And gamble probably.
Gamble.
Also
yeah.
blech.
Yeah.
Well, we're off to a good start. Happy 19th birthday, Sean.
Happy 19th birthday, Sean. Don't have a lot of rights, but I think there is something about political office, though, as well. I think you have the ability to run for political office, which he would actually really appreciate.
He really would appreciate
except
that.
for running for president, you have to be 35, I believe, if I remember my civics class correctly.
Fun fact, we just went on spring break. I went with Lauren and Sean and Shanna to Texas, and we spent part of our day in Dallas at the 6th Floor Museum, which is a tribute to JFK.
Okay.
So it's from the 6th floor where shots were fired. And you put on a headset and you walk around to these different rooms and it kind of captures the story. And it was really fascinating, Tess. As much as I am kind of disengaged about history, I was fascinated. I really was.
It is. I've walked down to the spot where you can walk to the spot
we did too.
on the street, right, where the white X is and the memorial is just beautiful.
We did that.
Wow, that's awesome.
The interesting part for me was listening to the recordings of the rallies and the times that he spoke and just trying to imagine what that would be like to be part of that kind of energy, all that he inspired with the Peace Corps and people taking part and being part of a better nation. It was almost surreal to even imagine what that must have been like. And then also to realize how far we have to go. You know, you would think how far we've come, but yet how much more work we need to do. So you would have loved it. It was really a great part of our trip.
That's awesome.
Yeah, little hashtag context that I was using from my lesser talents.
I love it. So I was thinking in the midst of what now has been, is it the official spring equinox passed this weekend?
Correct. It was part of a full supermoon, the worm moon, which means spring.
Okay.
It's the worm moon.
Interesting. But I was thinking that's so bizarre.
Sometimes you say interesting because you're thinking, and sometimes you say interesting like, I don't want
to know. Like, that was a useless fact that I know in my head about the worm moon.
Here comes Allison with her moon facts.
With her moon facts. But I was thinking, yeah, you're so right, interesting. I read this great article when the Super Bowl was in Minnesota last year, and it was like 10 phrases or 10 things you need to know about Minnesotans if you're coming to visit. And one of them, and it was all about Minnesotan phrases like, oh, you betcha, and oh, yeah, and things like that. And one of them was, the word interesting is the response to I highly doubt that, or I'm very skeptical about what you just told me, or I don't care. It was like 12 different translations, and it was like interesting. And I'm like, I think it's just my verbal pause. My go-to response. Sometimes
when you say it, you're really thinking.
Oh, yes.
So you have a nonverbal response with your verbal response that tells me what nuance of your verbal response.
Kind of interesting
yes.
it is.
So that was a I do not care interesting. Whereas if I was maybe telling you about the 6th Floor Museum and you said interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah. Even our podcast listeners ought to have been able to catch the difference between that one.
That tone, yeah.
Take a pause right now and listen back to the two interestings and see if you can tell.
Oh my gosh, too funny.
Supermoons are powerful because you have an opportunity to harness the energy of that moon.
I had to mentally keep my mouth shut from saying interesting. Interesting.
So, but I think
Anyway.
what's great about it is the worm moon signifies spring.
Okay. Yes, that makes sense. So I was excited about spring, talking about the warm weather. Lots of people, classic Midwestern small talk. Oh, nice weather today, huh? And my parents came down to visit this weekend, and there's still a bunch of snow on the ground up north, and so they came down, and we're so excited about the warm weather and no snow, even though it was still pretty rainy this weekend. But so I wanted to talk. It got me to thinking, right, based on our strengths, based on, I don't know, it could be our generational differences. What season we appreciate the most. Maybe it's not the answer to our what's your most favorite season, right? Because if you say the favorite season, that's my favorite season, you're going to get judged for sure. But which we'll dive into. But
This is a no judgment space.
I know, I appreciate that. I do judge you on your warm moon, though. But
It's okay. I take it. I know you don't mean it in a super judgy way.
No, I don't
It's interesting.
It's interesting. A fact to store away for later. Someone will probably ask me about a moon, and I'll tell them about the warm moon.
Or you might be at trivia night, and that could come up, and you will say, "Thank you."
Gosh darn it, Allie! You
Mystic.
let me win the trophy this week. So I just been thinking about what seasons give us the most life, right? What strengths bring us the most life, and from that, which of our strengths inform that, right? I think there's some personality, there's some maybe your experience with the seasons, but I think there is something about, and us both having connectedness high, about the cyclical changing of the seasons,
Mm-hmm.
right? But there's also, I think, something about what strengths, are there certain strengths, I guess is a hypothesis I'm rolling around in my head, that are more well-suited for certain seasons?
Oh.
Is my favorite season winter? We'll just say it. I'll confess. My favorite season is winter.
Let that sink in.
Right. Okay, everybody just pause and
say interesting.
But is it because I have such high thinking themes? And I have an excuse because it's socially acceptable to become a hermit during the winter.
Hibernate.
I like to call it hermit life.
Positive language.
I say I'm a hermit at heart, but it's okay. It's a self-ascribed characteristic. But yes, to hibernate. So I get my thinking time. So I'm not as drained of energy during the winter. So it actually brings me life.
So
Right.
my first thought was hygge.
Oh, for sure. Mm-hmm.
Finland, by the way, is it's the best place to live right now. It's
Oh.
number one. I just read an article about it.
I did not. That was the Scandinavian country I did not make it to.
And
did not make it to Finland.
And the things that they factor in.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's also another fascinating way for us to think about seasons. But I think you're right. It gives you an opportunity to hibernate and cozy up
Mm-hmm.
with your books
Right.
and your records
Mm-hmm.
and your learning.
Yeah.
And I think also, Tess, it allows the introvert to heal. Because when you were talking about Midwesterners were just all, oh, yay, the weather is better. I think we were almost freaking out level of, yay. I mean, everyone and their dog literally was outside.
Yeah.
I saw people
in shorts in
Right.
50-degree weather.
and flip-flops. I thought, I don't even know, do these people live on my street? So I think all of us had been in such hibernation mode, but when it's nice out, I think it's harder for introverts to go inside.
Yeah.
During winter, it's encouraged.
Yeah.
Cozying up is encouraged. So is winter truly your favorite season?
100%, yes.
All winter long.
For the most part, yes. My favorite time of winter is after a fresh blanket of snow. When it doesn't I don't like dirty snow because then it's not as fun, right? But when there's a fresh blanket of snow everywhere, when you can see the snow falling on the street lights, right? You're inside, or I like to walk outside in the snow with a warm cup of coffee or a warm cup of tea or hot cocoa or something.
You're
right?
truly like Danish.
I truly.
You embody.
I know, right? My whole, like, you just see me, you know, like, closing up in a few different layers. Yeah, having great music on, reading a book, or, like, even hanging out with my friends, like, playing games.
So are you feeling loss with the end of this season? Are you feeling, I don't want to say loss. The word I'm looking for is longing, maybe?
Yeah.
Kind of a mixture between those two. Like, are you seeing it passing and thinking, oh.
Yeah, definitely. Most definitely. So
About winter.
Yeah. So
okay. Interesting.
So I have almost like, it's sad to me. It really is that winter is closing, because when I think about my love of hibernation, that's not socially acceptable in the other 3 seasons, right? I can't go home and put on my pajamas at 6 o'clock at night.
Well, you could, but
I could.
But cozying up when it's 95 degrees out isn't the same.
Isn't the same. Like, I can't cuddle under a blanket. I don't want a warm mug in my hand when it's 95 degrees outside.
Right. It's almost Sauv Blanc season is the way that I look at it. Yeah.
Oh, man.
So you're transitioning. Right. Put away the Cabernet, and it's time for
Cab all year.
I know, but me too. But I think that is so you. When you think about your strengths, also when you think about your values, your personality, but generationally, do you feel like, to me, and my grandpa, also Danish, that's what I think about my grandpa. That was him. I don't remember seeing him out in the garden. I remember seeing him next to the record player with a book and his glasses and a pipe. You know, that's the image.
Like we would have gotten along really
You
well.
really would have. And he had total love of history, was constantly learning and talking about history, talking about politics, talking about where the nation was. I mean, when I have a vision of him, it's not him outside in the garden or farming, which he farmed for years, but the vision I have of him, where he was most himself, was in his chair with a pipe, with his books.
That's awesome. So I don't know. So generationally, I'm a little less uncertain about, but I think, like, since our last conversation about balconies and basements, I've learned and I think I've really been reflecting on kind of the basements of a lot of my strengths, and I feel like the triggers for so many of my strengths to slip into the basement is not enough alone time to process. And my top 10, I have 6 strategic thinking themes, and so some of those, like, my learner manifests best when I get to teach somebody, right? So that has to be around people, and I have a lot of other relational strengths, so I need to be around people, but my around people, best scenario being around people is either with a small group or like one-to-one teaching, or having social time. And so that looks like best seated in like a home or like my cozy apartment. But so when I'm thinking about the basements of my strengths, and having an awareness of maybe what triggers my strengths to go into the basement is, difficult times, stress. We talked about that a lot in the last episode, but also is I know what my strengths look like when they're at their best, right? And also they slip into when they're their worst, when I don't have time to let them fully be themselves, right? To let the themes manifest as they naturally would, right? If my intellection, for example, gets shoved into a box, or I have to give a response right away and don't get time to process, that's not really great. It will slip into the basement, right? It will just be overthinking, constantly thinking. My body can't keep up with it, right? But if I give myself enough alone time, right, which is more socially acceptable in the winter because of hibernation mentality, then I am very much at my best.
So I was thinking about connection. We're designed for connection, but we tend to neglect connection to self.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I was sharing with you, Tess, before we started about a podcast I listened to, which will be a conversation for another day, but around connection and attachment. But I think we fail to really think about that connection to self. So where are you having conversations within? And I think regardless of your strengths, regardless of your generational perspective, regardless, all of us could do a little more self-check. And when we teach that to littles, self-regulation, let's take 5 seconds here and count to 5. I think connection to self, knowing yourself, knowing your season is winter, and that brings you joy. Coming into this new season, what are you going to need? Like we talked about in the last episode, what do you need to get to that level of okay?
Yeah.
So do you need to take time out in the spring months ahead to give yourself an opportunity to be in your jammies at 6 o'clock? Jammies is not a word I use. Jammies and pajamas got combined. Okay. I prefer jammies. I was thinking about pajamas. I said jammas. That is not, I want to correct myself.
I knew exactly what you meant.
Do you listen to these after?
No, often not.
Okay, I always do.
Sometimes for sound quality.
What's that say?
I don't know. Me, it's like I just want to try and block out my memory and thinking about other people are listening to these.
See, I listen because I think other people are listening to these. Funny. And I wonder, are they gaining anything at all?
Jammas.
Interesting. So I hear myself, and sometimes I don't stop and correct myself. And I'm trying really hard to work on that. Okay. So there that is. And when we're talking about connection and what you need, when we talked about what heals you, could you give yourself, even though it doesn't get dark till 8 now? Yeah. And you just like that. It's okay to say that.
I just like that.
Really?
Yep.
So what will you need to... I use this metaphor all the time. I got to go to California 7 years in a row, every spring, and every time I was there, I didn't want to leave. I loved it so much. In reality, I can't live there. Not right now, anyway. So every time I left, I brought a little bit of Cali with me, just a little bit, so that I could have it in my life here. So I think, what can you take of winter through each of your seasons so that you feel like you're honoring that cozy hygge, that you're honoring your best self, but also you're honoring your intellection strength and your introversion and need to connect to self.
That's good.
Okay, I'm going to challenge you all throughout. So that's going to be my question to you. How are you connecting to winter right now?
How am I connecting to winter right now? It's a good question.
And you don't have to answer it right now. I'm going to be asking you that all the time.
Okay.
How are you connecting to winter right now?
Okay.
Maybe we could bring you a scarf every once in a while.
Every once in a while. But I want to hear from you, what season do you feel like brings you the most life, and how do you feel like that lends to your strengths?
This will be an easy spot for you. I look forward to hearing your response, unless it's interesting. I like the beginning of each season.
Classic. Could have told you that.
Because I love the way that each new season reminds me of growth and change, but also a connection to that was easy, a connection to the next season. So I love the beginning of spring, especially right now. I'm sleeping with my window open. It begins the open window season for me. I realize it's quite chilly, and I open it just a crack because I like to be able to hear the sounds of spring outside. And the birds are awake now. Awesome. So I naturally wake. I typically don't use an alarm. I really don't like to. And if I have to use an alarm or I have to count on it, then I don't sleep well. If I naturally sleep and wake, I sleep really well, and I usually wake between 5 and 6 a.m. naturally. But the birds are they're my call. It's like, okay, I don't even have to look at the clock. I know what time it is. So I like the sound of that. I also love sunrise, and that's coming at a more opportune time for me than in the winter season. I love sunset, and I love that I feel like I can have lingering conversations in the spring and summer at the dinner table with my kids because it doesn't feel like something has to happen next. When we lived in our house in Hebron on Barger, we had a really beautiful outdoor deck that we spent a lot of time on. And I looked forward to this season because people would gather and we could be outside. So easy to strength spot that one as well. I like the beginning of fall because I love the color change. I love witnessing, again, rebirth, growth, passing, the seasons. I think there's really something to be said about what we can learn from each one. I don't always look forward to winter because for me, now when I was young I did because I loved being able to play outside. I was listening to, again, Mary Pfeiffer. Can I say her name enough on this podcast? I was listening to her interview where she was talking about she's 71 now. She has found that she still loves to do what she did at 10. And I talk a lot about 10-year-old self. But if I think about my 10-year-old self, I loved to read. I loved playing outside. I loved riding my bike to the well and back or down to the creek and back. All of these things that I still love to do. I loved my music at the time. That was my cassettes or my mom's old 45s. I loved being with my friends. And so I think at the beginning of winter when I was 10 years old, it meant there was a new area to explore. So we could create tunnels and we could make igloos. And we had our family farm sits on the west side, the east side of town, on the south side of the road. And so we had 2 lines of evergreen trees, 2 actual like rows, one and then another, on both the north side and the west side. And when you were little, those trees were, it was a tunnel pathway. So in the wintertime, the snow wouldn't often get in there. And I could literally go through all of these passages. It was like a cavern. We did a lot of that kind of stuff. So I looked forward to winter season then. I looked forward to no school days. Now I do not look forward to driving. I am white knuckle drive when the weather is bad. So I think my approach to winter is different than it ever used to be. Which I hadn't really pondered that. I love that we have no agenda on these.
I know.
And then I ponder things I haven't thought about ever.
I was thinking that too.
Okay, so you want to strength spot that? That's pretty easy, I guess.
Connectedness, for sure. That doesn't surprise me at all, the changing of the seasons. I think I want to strength spot your developer too. It's a lot about rebirth and growth. And
where's developer for me?
I was trying to think.
I don't even know.
It's in the teens, somewhere in the upper teens, mid-teens. Not in your top 10, I don't think,
but I've been using it more lately.
For sure.
Because I've been doing more coaching.
Yeah.
I've been doing some additional teaching outside of just strengths.
Yeah.
I've been putting resources together around purpose and growth mindset.
I definitely think so. I think that what I wanted, to spot about it was the developers seeing the potential, right, in other people specifically, but also oftentimes the picture is the planting of the seed and seeing the seed turn to a seedling and then turn to a sprout and then turn to whatever plant or flower that it turns into. And so I think that there's something about the when you talked about each season, it's almost like knowing what's going to come, so seeing what the season could bring in terms of its potential. And so
there's some safety and stability in the season changes for me. If everything else might be different, there's safety, a calm in it for me that I know what to expect because I think so much of my life has not been like that. I also think about the season that I'm in as a person at 44, the season that I'm in as a parent at having adult children. Also, the recognition of the season that I'm in this time of year at work. So I get really energized this time of year because we're starting to put things together for the new year. We're looking at what worked. We're looking at what went well. We're looking at where we got stuck. We're looking at what needs our effort and energy. And I think we're toiling the soil right now because we're thinking about what seeds need to be planted before our annual conference, before we have the wonderful opportunity to be in front of all of our program coordinators and board members and even mentors. And then we're also thinking about what seeds need to be planted for the new year as we grow. So to me, that's also a lot connectedness, but maybe even some of my individualization too.
And your empathy, I was going to spot. Definitely want to spot your woo in terms of bringing people together.
It's my favorite thing.
On the deck, outside in the warm weather. I think that's awesome. How often was there a new person invited out to the deck?
So when we moved to Hebron, we knew no one, and then we became
friends with everyone.
The hub.
Yep, of course.
Of the connecting. So actually, when we divorced and moved, one of our couple friends, she came to us and said, and now what are we supposed to do? And I said, well, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
But she said, right, got some things going on. Got to worry a little bit. Like, where am I going to live? But it was interesting because I think it rattled her stability that the hub of the social circle, we didn't have the nicest house.
Jeez,
what is happening?
House.
We didn't have the nicest house. We didn't have the biggest deck or space. Parking, we were on a corner. It wasn't exactly a good space for that. But I think we worked hard at creating. I am really struggling. I am so sorry, universe. We worked really hard at creating an invitation and a sense of belonging. And so when I would gather people, I always loved to serve appetizers and drinks and try new things. And, you know, do you like this? Did you like this? I found this recipe. I'm going to try this on my group. But then I just love joy. I love joy so much. And when you can hear people laughing or, you know, talking in a way that they felt honored and heard and that they could participate, I mean, what is better than that? To me, not much. And I've been spending a lot of time thinking about that because I've lost that. Don't have that same, I have a deck, but I don't have that hub anymore. And I miss that. I'm really lucky that I still am connected to a lot of my friends back there. My friend Amy and I are going to get together in the next couple of weeks. I look forward to that. I look forward to when my friend Annie is up this way. I think it's interesting, Tess, because there are a lot of life seasons that can completely destroy someone's view of a season. A life event can wreck your perspective. And there was a time when spring was not my favorite because it was a reminder of a hard time. There was a time when winter was really hard for me because that was a season where my dad died in a farm accident. You know, I think people can really, it's a strong memory when you think about the season. So I think the season of life or your season that you might be going through can affect your view of the natural or seasons of nature.
For sure. And I think you're right. I mean, I think about, for example, when like how smells can be triggers to memory, like they can be tied to like good things and bad things. Like I think about how our seasons, right, what's going on even like in nature around us can be affected by what season we're going on personally. So that can be tied to something very difficult. So it's interesting.
What's that called? What's your sense of smell called?
Your sense of smell called?
Yes. Auditory, memory. What's your sense of smell called?
Smell?
Well, I'll look it up in the meantime, and I'll post it to our worth mentioning.
Okay.
That is well known as one of the strongest memory triggers.
Oh, for sure.
So I can, and I know we've talked about this before, but the smell of lilacs is spring, and it's my grandma's backyard.
Yeah.
There was a purple, huge lilac bush, a purple one and a white one.
Yeah.
And I had it in my head that the purple had a stronger scent. But I would go out there because that's where her raspberry bush was in the middle of them.
Yeah.
And I would go out. I mean, I can remember this as vivid as if it was 2 seconds ago. But if you think I could tell you 90% of what I learned in college, okay, just kidding. Don't professors. I remember
90. You remember?
Somewhat. But I mean, to think about what a trigger that is for me, anywhere that I am, when I smell lilacs, I could put myself back. It's just like time travel.
Okay, so I think about that. I was recently, I'm trying to remember. Yeah, so my parents were here this weekend. I was playing a playlist. My mom and I have similar music tastes, and we were going around record shopping and was playing Hoogly Times, a playlist that I have. It's kind of all like mellow indie stuff. And one of the songs came on that is from a record that was released when I was living in Denmark. And it automatically puts me back on a train in Hamburg, Germany, where I remember with my friend that I was traveling with, we like shared earbuds, like the split earbud, listening to this album that just came out from an artist we both really loved. And so just the ability for, I definitely get smell, taste, even touch, but also like there have been a few times where just songs, it's like the soundtrack of our lives, right? Like there's, when certain songs come
Absolutely.
on, it just puts you back. There's a few songs that I have of that, and one of them came up this weekend, and I was like driving, trying to keep my eyes open, because all I could do was like close my eyes to sit back in that train from like 4 years ago, right?
That's awesome.
So it's so cool.
I want to do a little bit of circle back. So you had talked about our last Genn and Millie.
Yep.
You talked about anticipating your trip to Chicago.
Oh.
And that you needed to be around other humans. Were you around a lot of other humans?
I was around a ton of other humans.
And was it all that you had hoped it would be?
It definitely was good. I wouldn't say like it was like all I hoped it would be, but it was definitely very much needed for that space in my life and time in my life.
And so when you think back to knowing yourself, you knew you needed that.
Yep.
But now we can talk about the reflection and the introversion that needs to be honored. My guess is when you got back, you needed some quiet time.
Oh, immediately, yes. Normally I'm listening to an audiobook or a podcast or music or something while I'm in my apartment, but when I got back, it was literally dead quiet, and I just left it like that. Like I unpacked and I took a shower and kind of debriefed, and then like went to bed, and I didn't play anything. I had no music the whole time, right? And I didn't even like realize it because I was just thinking, right? Like I don't realize most of the time I don't realize when there isn't something playing for a while because I'm just so in my head. And yeah, so it was, just really good. And I actually was a little nervous knowing that I had all of that social time with people, and then my parents were coming, and traditionally they stay with my sister, but there's been some like kind of issues there where they didn't know if they'd have the availability of a room in her house like they normally do. And so my mom had reached out just separately and asked if I could, if they could stay with me. Well, then when they got here, my sister was like, I spent the last 3 days cleaning the house. We have a room prepared for you. So I, in my head, had it that they were also staying this coming weekend, and I was like, oh man, that's a whole lot of social time. Like normally I like hang out with my friends for a couple hours on the weekend, like max like one evening. Otherwise I'm like by myself the whole weekend, studying or cleaning or doing whatever. Thinking, just like when I sit in my, on my couch and just ponder life. And so anticipating the fact that my parents were going to stay with me was a little bit overwhelming, just having had a ton of social time for the previous weekend, and kind of having a busy week of catching up and being in the office a lot. And so when my sister said that, and my parents were like, oh, well, we don't want to, be offensive. Is it okay if we stay with them? They knew I'd be fine with that. I'm like, like out loud, I'm like, oh yeah, that, I mean, I got my apartment.
You're nonverbal.
Right. I'm like, yeah. And the words that are coming out of my mouth are like, oh, I totally understand. She spent the whole time getting prepared for you guys. Definitely you should stay with her. That would be respectful, right? In my head, I'm like, yeah! A long time! Woohoo! And so it was very nice to to have, like, I make jokes like separation of church and state, like they stayed with my sister, and so then I had time in the evenings and then time right away in the morning to just like think and be by myself. And
I think it's so interesting that, particularly with our generational perspective and our strengths, I have become more introverted the older I've become.
Yeah.
And my strengths are very extroverted.
Yeah.
But I've learned that I have to rest them. Now, when I was the same age that you are, I don't like to say when I was your age anymore. I just think it's a terribly, it comes across, really well, and also comes across as when I was your age. And that's not how I want to say it. When I was the same age that you are now, I was constantly social with 2 little kids. No, I hadn't had Sean yet. With 1 little one, and trying to connect with other people. Yeah. We were doing play dates all the time. I was constantly social with family, with friends. Crazy. So to think about that, no, wait, I had 2 littles. Yeah, you had 2 littles. Yeah. And we were moving and doing all, and I was constantly connection. I mean, constant. When we moved to Hebron and I didn't have that constant connection, I think I've told this story here before, where the poor kid who was working in produce found me crying, pushing the shopping cart. He was like, "Ma'am, are you okay?" I'm like, "I just don't know why we moved there." And the poor guy, and he was so, I can still see him. He was so kind. I mean, he was kind of like, "Well, I don't always like it here either." And then I'm sure he was, I mean, they didn't have a headset, but I could imagine him turning around and going, "Help, Mayday, over here, Mayday. Someone." But it was hard because I lost my connections. And I couldn't be extroverted. I was home with 2 littles, not knowing anyone. Yeah. And so as soon as I had the opportunity to make connections, I remember when Connie Cody, who is a dear friend who passed away a few years ago now, Connie called and said, "Would you like to go to a play with us?" And I said, like a theater production? And she said, "Yeah, we have a community theater here." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, do you need to know when it is?" I said, "No, we're going." And we had so much fun. And she looked down at me. We're watching, and we had front row seats. And she pointed at me and she said, "You should do this." Huh. And then I did. Like, I don't know how many theater productions I did. And it was, connection. Yeah. And then having to reframe life and start over again, finding those new connections. So I think the older I've become, the more cognizant and maybe cautious, and even just not discriminatory, that's not the word I want, but I'm more
selective.
I use discernment when it comes to how I give of my social energy. I mean, I would much rather spend time with Lauren and Sean first. And then I always need some time to reflect. So it's interesting how, based on our strengths and our generational perspective, I think the older I get, the more introverted I become. My younger self was much more extroverted. But I think it's probably getting to a point of a mature use of a strength. I want to strength spot Sarah. We love when people say that they're A, listening to Genn and Millie, but B, give us an example of their own version of what we were talking about. Yep. And Sarah sent us a picture of her bag for the weekend at the airport. It was literally the smallest duffel I've ever seen. That was not even a carry-on in my mind.
No, it was the
like I have a purse. Item. I have a purse bigger than that. And she said, "Here's my bag for the weekend." And at first I was like, "Someone help."
It's like, "Where's the second picture?"
Or "Send help right away."
Mayday.
And then I responded with, "That's mature use of strategic." Because she's really thinking about what does she exactly need. And when Sarah and I chatted a little bit this morning, I was talking about your strategic is very similar. And my strategic is, oh no, what am I missing? Paired with input is, it's a different look on strategic. So I'm thinking that's strategic and maximizer for Sarah.
For sure.
For you, it's strategic adaptability. And mine is strategic input, which is I cannot be without.
What if I need this?
Right. So for those of you who are listening in, we would love for your feedback. We would love for you to send us your thoughts, images, what season do you love the most?
Yeah.
What do you love about that season? What senses does it trigger? And what strengths do you think that it indicates, or what generational perspective do you think it might indicate?
Yeah.
Or maybe what does it indicate about your values, or what you need, or what heals you?
Yeah, awesome. Oh, such good thoughts. I'm so interested to hear, because Ellie, if we had more time, I wouldn't accept that answer of not picking a season and just picking the change of seasons, but we'll leave it at that, and hopefully get more clarification as people submit their thoughts and responses to the episode. But thank you, everybody, for tuning in to episode 37 of Genn and Millie. We're new to the podcasting world, as you guys know, so which I feel like we're getting to the point where we're not quite new anymore. But
maybe we should have a different word there.
A rating, a review. We are novice.
Ooh.
To the podcasting world. I didn't even use a thesaurus.
You didn't.
So please, it just came out of my head. So please give us a rating and review. Share us with friends. Get their thoughts on it too. It's a fun dialogue to have. Like maybe ask at the dinner table. What is your favorite season? And what talents, what strengths, what things about your personality or your generation do you feel like inform that? But we'd love to interact with you, to hear your thoughts on this episode and previous episodes, so please feel free to share the answers to the questions that we posed by either following us on Instagram at Genn and Millie, at GENNANDMILLIE, or sending us an email or contacting us really in any other way. We love all forms of communication, so feel free. But thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in and for listening to this episode, and so we will sign off and talk to you next time.